Call to order and roll call.
Chairperson Ferguson,
Here.
Member Mayhorn, Member Schutte,
Here.
Member Wells, Member Duke,
Here.
a quorum is present.
Okay, thank you. Public is invited to comment at this time. Do we have any public on the phone?
There's no public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. For possible action, number 4, approval of the July 12th, 2022 meeting minutes. Any questions, comments, or concerns on the minutes as they're presented? Hearing none, do I have a motion for approval?
I'll move to approve the minutes for the July 12th, 2022 Audit Committee meeting.
All in favor?
Or I second and yes? Or did you
Yeah,
say?
second.
I'm sorry.
Yep. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next item is number 5, adoption of today's agenda. Checking on here. Okay, we got,
There's no changes to the agenda.
okay, thank you. Looks good. All right. Agenda's adopted, meeting items. Going on to number 6 already. Up for possible action is discussion and possible action regarding the retest of the internal vulnerability assessment and external penetration initially performed on October 30th, 2020, and any additional recommendations noted. Sherry.
Yes, thank you. So we presented this at the last meeting and there were no findings included. So we had the auditor redo the report so that the findings are in there now. And then I sent you the backup detail, Steve and James, I sent you to the backup detail, very long spreadsheet of all of the detailed findings. We do not share that with the public simply because it gives hackers a roadmap into our system. But if any other board member is interested in seeing all of that detail, I'm happy to forward it to you. I have with me Frank Abella. He is the CIO, Chief Information Officer for the city. If you have any questions about that report.
Thanks, Frank. Nice to meet you.
Good morning or good afternoon.
Did anyone have any questions on the IT audit that was done? Follow-up retest? Okay, go ahead, James.
I just wanted to follow up on the findings because it looks like we have, and I guess we'll close these as part of the next agenda item or a couple down the road. Most are either partially or fully remediated out of the ones that were listed in the report. And in the detailed report, there were some that had some future quarters. So I just want to make sure that we're not closing stuff that will be finished in like the fourth quarter or first quarter of 2023.
Yeah, that is correct. We're not going to actually remediate those until the end of calendar year of 2022 due to the fact that we have a gap that we're not allowed to do anything for the elections and the integrity of elections. And that's why there's that gap in there.
So I think what we're closing are policies that are already in place.
That's stuff that's already been done, not
And
stuff
then
that's already.
when we get to that item that's in the findings tracking sheet, we'll talk about, there's 2 questions I have for you guys, so.
And thank you so much for sharing that. That was extremely helpful to me and probably maybe a little bit overwhelming even, but it definitely gave me a better idea of what we were talking about when we're looking at this.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, hopefully the report looks better this time and we can accept it. I did not go to the board with the recommended closures from the last meeting just because there was such a problem with the IT report. So I wanted to make sure we had new findings in place before we close the old findings. Absolutely.
Good. Any other questions on that IT retest? No, I think we're good. Thank you. So the next item is also IT related.
Can we make that a motion so I
So
can?
I will make a
accept the
motion to
report.
approve the report and direct staff to work on the recommendations as discussed in the report.
Thank you.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Next item is related to the endpoint security assessment, wireless assessment, internal audits, recommendations. Again, Sherry.
So these two reports I lumped into one staff report because there are only 3 findings, and you'll find when we get to the findings report, all 3 of them are remediated. So Frank did a great job in this area. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help. They did list out their recommendations in the report as we did in the previous report. So hopefully you have an idea of what the issue was and how it was fixed.
Yep. Any questions, comments on that, this IT assessment? James, anything? Okay, well, that was pretty easy. Can we get a motion to approve that?
So I would move to approve the endpoint security and wireless assessment internal audits and recommendations, and thank the staff for working on remediations so quickly.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Moving on to 6C. This is
All right.
related to the preliminary risk assessment for the body worn camera program and recommendations. Sherry?
This is a new one you have not seen before, so I'll probably hand this over to Audrey, who hopefully is, yes, she is on the line.
Good afternoon, Audrey.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for coming.
We also have the Undersheriff, Jerome Tushbont, on the phone as well, joining us today. I want to personally thank him for his time and involvement in this preliminary risk assessment of the body-worn camera program. He was very timely with his responses, provided information, sometimes repeating the same question multiple times just to get a layer deeper into the process. And he was very patient, understanding, and very helpful with this audit. So thank you, Jerome. Appreciate your time. This engagement, as mentioned, was a preliminary risk assessment, and the main objective was to identify if we needed to conduct further internal audit work in this area at this time. Over this evaluation, we identified 4 recommendations and do move towards delaying an internal audit until recommended corrective action have been implemented related to the body-worn camera activation, the video uploads and categorization, the monitoring of the body-worn camera program, as well as the body-worn camera policy. Management did agree with our recommendations and are implementing corrective action now. I'll turn it over to any questions or comments you may have.
Questions, comments?
One, I think.
Go ahead, James.
So I think one of the big things that was in there was a implementation of a new module or a new component or a new subsystem, or maybe it's even an external system that as part of the remediation of the findings, but there was not clarity as to whether there was funding at this time. So my guess is that it has not been funded at this time. Is there discussions about I thought it said something about a pilot, that they were going to still do the pilot, even though it wasn't necessarily funded ongoing, and then kind of come back to my guess is to the 2023 or the supplemental for 2022 to see if they're going to actually do the funding for the extra module.
So Jerome can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think their Axion, their current body cam like product, has offered them a free pilot to try out this software. So I don't know how much it'll be. I believe they're looking at more than just Axion. They're looking at other systems. So I believe if they would request funding, it'd probably be part of the 24 budget. Yeah.
And so given that, I think I heard Audrey say that the recommendation is not to go forward with the full-fledged audit at this time until some of those things are kind of flushed out.
Yes, it's probably to wait after a year after implementation so that we can actually have something to test. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Audrey, refresh my memory. Have you guys audited this with other cities? And what's been the experience so far? This is all relatively new for everybody. And I'm just curious too, question to Jerome, how's the actual system working, this Axion? Is it a good system? Do you guys like using it? Is it user-friendly? Stuff like that. Just trying to get a read on how it actually works out in the field.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and respond to that first, if I may, Chair.
Sure, thank you.
The process that we took as a preliminary risk assessment is we did not conduct any internal audit testing. So the methodology within our report really outlines the process in which we performed, which was to review the Nevada revised statute, and that's specific to the body-worn camera, also in the Appendix A of our report. We obtained and reviewed the Sheriff's Office policies and procedures, and we reconciled those P&Ps to the Nevada revised statute. From there, we did have a recommendation related to the policy and that's number 4, around the disciplinary actions around policy. And that actually triggered yet another Nevada revised statute that the department is currently implementing. So high level, we also then looked at best practices, and Axon, the software that they currently utilize for body-worn camera, is one of the primary software that's being used out there across most jurisdictions that have this program in place. What we found was several other areas that needed to have monitoring in place, recommendations related to the activation of the body-worn camera program and how that reconciles with dispatch 911 calls that requires an activation of the body-worn camera. Management's response clearly identifies that with the latest technology, based on best practice, that process will be improved. So without testing in this area, which we've always gone in on previous municipalities that we've done this sort of project for, we've always gone in and tested, and we've been able to provide a lot more granular details with regards to the practices of uploading video, accessing the video storage later, monitoring of the video storage, which we will see in time once that additional software or whatever vendor that they decide to go with, once that process is in place, we'll be able to get in there and do a preliminary or a detailed review and an actual internal audit of the process.
Okay.
And I'll turn it over to Jerome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jerome Tushpan for the record. To tell you about Axon, it is a good company that we've worked with for many years. They actually were the ones who created tasers, and then they slowly went into this other type of business. We've been using body-worn cameras for, about 4 years now. And then just recently on September 1st, we turned on the system for in-car cameras, which is a complementary system. I think there were some questions about the performance product. This is the product that is part of the Axon system. And what that does is helps us to achieve a lot of the legislative requirements, both under unbiased policing and early warning systems. We're happy with the company. We expect we're going to be with them for quite some time. And I'm more than happy to answer any other questions you guys might have.
And then this is probably more a question IT related, Sherry, but last meeting we talked about the massive storage this takes up and costs related to that. It's all, my understanding, it's all cloud-based, right?
Yes, I was absolutely wrong. We do not hold it on our system.
Okay.
It's cloud-based and it's Axion that's holding our data.
Okay. And I guess one of the things, I don't know if we looked at it or how close we looked at it, but retention requirements on different footage and so forth, is it, you know, I don't know the costs involved, but are we looking at significant costs for retention because we don't have a thoroughly, you know, buttoned down retention guidelines and so forth?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. That would be through Axion. I don't know what our bandwidth is with Axion.
Okay.
So that would probably be more of a deeper dive into,
Audrey, did you guys look at retention at all in this initial kind of overview?
Yes, the review was looked at from two different perspectives. The first one was on the data retention within the cloud storage service provider Axon. We did not do any sort of internal audit review of the data storage to ensure that those were categorized correctly, to ensure they had the proper data retention and storage, primarily because they have infinite amount of storage, meaning they can retain the video infinitely if that is their desire. There is a policy, retention policy that is utilized, and the city also, we looked at it from a second perspective of the jail cams and the juvenile facility, the building facilities, the camera and the retention within the city's data storage. And there is a current project on way right now, and Frank Abella could probably speak a lot more detail than I can here, but there is a current policy with the DA who's working on that retention policy. But for now, the percentage of cameras that are stored is 100% until that retention policy is approved. And the total storage right now is unknown. We know that we're at capacity, and it's they're making implementations and corrections in order to stretch out that capacity.
Okay.
I don't know if Frank or Jerome wants to add anything.
For the retention of all files within the city, there is a policy process right now that we have to understand what that's going to look like, whether it's email, personal files, department files, financial files, board meeting files, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so we've asked the district attorney to look at those and to understand what there's going to be and to actually present that to IT for we can start presenting what's called a retention policy, technical policy, within our storage system to make sure that once that ages out, it comes out permanently, basically. So is it a 3-year for emails? What type of emails, type of individuals? So there's a lot of deep dive and a lot of discovery that has to happen in that process. And right now, that's where we're at right now. It's basically how do we store and how long do we keep all these files? Right now, it's everything all the time right now. So.
Okay. So that includes the scope of this external cloud-based storage?
That is correct.
Yeah, okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Other questions, comments?
Thank you. It was just really helpful reading the responses. So Jerome, thank you for, and I know it's standard that there would be a management response to the recommendations, but that was really helpful, and it also brings to light the layers of seeing a project like this through. And so I also support postponing an audit until these issues can be addressed. I mean, even talking about the supervision and the requirement, this is beyond the requirement of line level supervisors who are tasked with randomly reviewing officers' video. And so it may need to fall to a dedicated specialized employee. So I think those are the things that we would be looking into. This was just really helpful in terms of better understanding the cameras. So thank you.
Yeah, agreed. Other questions, comments? No? Okay. Thanks, Audrey and Jerome and Frank, for your work on this project. We appreciate it. So it was informative and interesting, actually. So, thank you. What do we have to do on this? Do we need a motion on this, or is it just, okay. Let's get a motion on accepting the report for the preliminary risk assessment of body worn camera program and recommendations.
I would move to accept or approve the report and direct staff to work on the recommendations as discussed in the preliminary risk assessment of the body worn camera project.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody. Okay, next one, 6D. Discussion and possible action regarding monitoring review, closure of the internal audit findings and recommendations included in the audit findings tracking report provided and providing recommendations to the Board of Supervisors to close findings and or recommendations. Sherry, thank you.
Thank you. So we already talked about social media. It's still here just because it's one item and I didn't take the IT to the board, so I decided to wait on that one too. Sorry. It seemed like a lot of time just to do one little line item. So the IT volatility, that's the initial audit back in 2020. And I have all those items as green because we did elect to close them at the last meeting. However, since the new report has the same findings, I didn't want to take that to the board for closure until the new findings or the new report was accepted. So again, it's there. I'll take to the board now that the new report is accepted. Community development, there is one item that we can talk about closing on this one. I am very sorry about the size of the font. I can barely read it. I will work on this and make sure the font is a decent size so we don't all go blind. So this one has to do with the, God, I can't even read this. Oh, they had different versions of the reports, and so they wanted to work with Charles Abbott to make sure and implement a workflow so everybody saw the correct version of the report. And there has been a meeting, and apparently this is happening. So she thought that this could be closed. Hope it told me this could. She thought this.
Yeah,
could be
this
closed.
is the one I think where they were doing versions, and if somebody approved it, they didn't necessarily see it. If somebody further down rejected it, then it didn't necessarily go back. The revised one didn't necessarily go back to the person who reviewed the initial one.
Right, and so they did have a meeting with Charles Abbott, and they discussed that whole. And so from my understanding is now it's going back to the right person, and the workflow is working as it should. Did you want to do them one at a time or just at the end?
Let's just close them, let's do them at the end.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that would be item 8 on the community
Got it.
development. The IT vulnerability update, this is the new one. There's 4 items on here I believe Frank thinks we can close today. We'll see how you guys feel about this. They're all policy procedures type, the first 3 on the first page. And then the last one, item number 6, is about future projects, internal control projects. And I think we just need to come up with an idea of how often we want to do this. I know the auditor had initially said, oh, it should be done every 6 months. But that's pretty much our entire budget would be spent on IT. So, so that's really not reasonable. We typically do internal control projects every 3 to 5 years. But again, this is IT. So if we wait that long, everything's going to be out of date. So, that's one of the questions I have is how often do we want to try to hit internal controls? Once every other year? Once every year? That was kind of a discussion I was asking you guys. And then once we make that decision, we can close number 6 because that's really what it's getting down to is we need to make sure these are always up to date.
Just, how much did we spend on this retest?
On the retest, and there were 3 projects. Was it about 20,000? I think it was 15 to 20,000 on the 3 projects.
Okay. So that.
But it
is
was
that-
just an update of the previous findings. They didn't
Right.
look at anything new.
Right. Is that, I mean, that's the question, is how much, of our budget, how much would this take up every couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Do you have an idea, Audrey?
Yeah, so the wireless end user vulnerability assessment, those 2 that were outside of the retest were 7,500. And then the IT vulnerability, the retest was 5,000.
Oh, okay.
So
A little over.
it should be less than, maybe 8,000. 8 to 10 at most.
That for a full test or just another update?
That's a retest, an update. If you wanted to do a retest on what was the original, let me go back a year.
Because I was kind of, I don't know. I mean, it's up to you guys again. You're the audit committee. But personally, I would think every 2 years, maybe you go in and do a vulnerability test. You don't just look at what they found in the past, but you actually go in and do a vulnerability of the system test, which I think is a little more expensive, correct, Audrey? 'Cause
It
that-
is. It was 35,000, the initial
Yeah.
test.
Yeah, and Audrey, do we look at this as potential area for review during our annual risk assessment?
We did, yes. And that was having a phase 2 vulnerability assessment performed. So rather than redo the original test, expand on that and include other areas such as unauthorized access, protecting the network confidentiality, integrity, availability. So going a little bit above and beyond what we did last time, or basically a phase 2 of what we called the IT vulnerability audit, and had budgeted about 32,000 for that.
Okay,
But that was not approved to roll forward.
right. I mean, my take would be it's, kind of every 2-year type thing, but we always include it in the annual risk assessment. If there's extenuating circumstances, things have changed, we've had issues, whatever, bump it up in a priority, but, certainly every 6 months is not it's not feasible, right? So, I don't know, other perspectives?
So I think for me, I think that every 6 months is a little bit of, to me, it's a lot of bit overkill. I think that we need to look at, I don't want it to be doing this too after we have a problem. And so for me, kind of it's as part of the annual risk assessment, maybe it's the IT, are there new systems that need to be, that weren't necessarily part of these original tests? Are there things that we've updated that we want to look at? I think that should be a discussion that we have every year to determine if there's things that probably should be tested, and rely on the experts in the IT field to tell us what they see as the potential vulnerabilities. They know their systems far better than we do, to let us know whether it rises to that level that we need to be looking at it. And then I think every so often, every maybe 2 to 3 years, we need to probably do the whole thing over
That's
again.
working, yeah. I would agree. Any other comments?
Okay.
Okay.
The other question I had on this one is the 2 that are open, number 1 and number 3, they're open. You can see the date until 6/30/2025. And that's basically when we feel we'll have the Tiburon system updated, with a brand new system. So I don't know if you want to wait for us to update these systems to, something that we know is really secure, or if we want to just mitigate those by like like Frank put, I think, putting him in a padded cell. I think that's what I don't understand that. I'm not an IT person. But he said he can do that, so that protects, it's a mitigating control.
So to explain a padded cell, basically, and not trying to get too technical, is just basically putting that application and any other applications within the Tiburon system to basically put it in between its own firewalls. And what it does is basically it only goes out to where it's supposed to go out. There's nothing coming in, nothing going out. We monitor that on a day-to-day basis, if not an hourly basis. So that's pretty much like a padded cell. It's just an IT term. So you just, what we call smash in between two firewalls, and we monitor it, and we put an extra monitoring process and path around there. So the more moats we have around there, the better off we'll be.
So that's my question, is if we can do that with these systems that are still at risk according to our auditors, we've mitigated those risks, can we close this early without waiting 3 years? Because I don't know, typically you don't want to leave things open that long.
Yeah, I think definitely looking at some kind of mitigating control like you've put in place here. I don't know, Audrey, based on the audit work that was done, do you think that, coordinating off these systems would be sufficient mitigating control until we can get a proper fix in place?
Yeah, it appears that containerizing these risks within the internal firewall should mitigate that risk. And if it's something that you wouldn't mind, I would like to ask Nathan Kramer, who performed this work, if he agrees with that as well. But it sounds like it should eliminate the need to keep those recommendations open.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe, Audrey, next meeting, we can leave those open for now, and next meeting you can let us know what they think about that. And we can
That'd be great.
potentially close these if we've got them all padded celled in. I'm sorry, that term cracked me up.
It's IT, they gotta get creative with our names.
I know.
We have a lot of acronyms and funny names, yes. It's unfortunate.
Okay, is that, the
So-
other three here are recommended closures for this year?
Yeah, 2, 4, and 5 are recommended closures now because they're policies and SOPs that have been created and are in process now. Right?
Okay,
So to be clear, the policy is created, but like some of the discussion we had in the actual item, some of the work is not quite finished. Because there was some in your list that said that they weren't going to be done till like the end of the fourth quarter, beginning of or the end of the first quarter of next year. There were items in the big list that had that they were not going to be done until a future quarter. So the policy has been created, but is that saying that that some of that work still will be done at a future date?
Yeah, the policy, there's a policy and there's a SOP or a standard operating procedures. Those have been created prior. The work itself on some of these issues that we have, especially the longer ones and the repetitive, we're just waiting for the appropriate downtime. A lot of them are within public safety that we cannot take down, so we have to work around to see when we can take these down and so on and so forth to apply the patch. It's simply just a simple patch. A lot of the patches have been applied, but we cannot reboot the system due to the fact it's part of public safety. So we have to get the right time to do that. We have to make sure that public safety is ready for it, and they have basically a procedure, or we call it emergency procedure, in case that system goes down while we're applying the reboot and everything else. If that makes sense.
okay. So Sherry, would we leave the pending input from Ed Bailey on the, segment that we were talking about as far as sectioning off these systems? Are we leaving this open then until the next meeting, or are you gonna close these?
I think I'd like to know what their auditor says about that to make
Okay.
sure they're on the same page as we are, and
Okay.
then we can close it, so.
Okay. Good.
But if we want to close 2, 4, and 5, I think those are more policy-based, so, or we can wait till the next meeting, it's up to you guys.
I say we just wait. That'll mean this will be assuming they're in agreement, this will be an easy to close out this
whole
audit
thing at
on the
one
next
time?
meeting. Yeah.
All right. The endpoint user is next, and there were 2 findings on that, and they have both been mitigated. So I was recommending closure on that.
Okay, good. Any questions on those? No.
And then I did put the body worn camera risk assessment in here as well on the last page, and that's going to take some time to mitigate. So none of that's ready for closure today.
Okay. So we need a motion to close out.
I think community development item 8 and endpoint user, the whole audit.
Okay. Somebody want to tee that up?
So I think the idea is that we recommend to the Board of Supervisors close item 8 on the Community Development Department audit and item 1 on the wireless assessment audit and items 1 and 2 on the endpoint security assessment audit, as well as all
Yes.
of the remaining items from the IT vulnerability audit, the original IT vulnerability audit or volatility audit, and the number 13 from the social media study. So we would close all of those, recommend closing all of those.
Thank you for remembering the wireless audit.
Can I get a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good, that passes.
I think we're going to talk about what to do with the extra one on that. And I won't take them on you again. Promise.
Okay, on to 6E. This is discussion and possible action to identify, discuss, and provide recommendations to the Board of Supervisors on the projects to be performed by the internal auditor through the period of June 30th, 2023. Thank you, Frank. Appreciate it.
So this I've also been holding off taking to the Board of Supervisors because we haven't had a complete plan yet. We were waiting for the sheriff worn body cameras to decide if we wanted to do that whole project or if we wanted to just do the risk assessment and then do something else. So I believe there's $10,000 was approved for the risk assessment for the body worn cameras, which would leave $35,000 available if we wanted to do a different project this year. A different audit project this year, and I know Audrey has some ideas we talked about. And if you guys had any ideas, we might have a little conversation about what we want to do with that $35,000.
Audrey, can we hear your ideas?
Yes, audit committee chair, absolutely. So we did a true up from the last time we performed the risk assessment, and we looked at all the board meetings, committee meetings, looked at what's outstanding, looked at the financial statements, and assessed from last date of risk assessment to today where the risks are. And one risk area, there's actually 2, but one risk area that we propose first, and it's one that we proposed last year, but it has actually gained more increase in the risk process, which is around grants. So there are 2 new funds around grants, and that's the grant fund and the regional transportation fund. Additional, there are several other grants for various projects such as public works, capital grants, and contributions. And we expect that the volume and the complexity of the grant activity to increase with the federal stimulus money. So we're proposing that a grant internal audit be performed to determine whether the city's financial control framework and related internal controls are effective and efficient to manage grant activity. We'd like to review the grant process, the procedures, the policies, and the controls for pre-award, post-award activity, operating and capital grants, federal and non-federal grants, and direct recipient and subrecipient grants. That's a mouthful. That was the first one. If I
Okay.
may continue, I'd like to talk about the next one,
And any idea on,
unless there's any
like,
questions on that.
any idea on a budget for that one?
Last year, when we proposed this FY 21-22, we were about 25,000. So that would, this may be right around that. I would feel comfortable at 25 to 30,000, but we can probably get this done for about 25.
Okay,
What do you think, Sherry? Is that doable?
I think that sounds reasonable. I mean, we do have a single audit every year with our external audit, where we get enough grants that we do that. But they don't usually take a deep dive. They do what they have to. So it's not a bad idea to look at. And I think Audrey would do more of a random sample as opposed to our auditors who look at the biggest grants so they can get coverage for what they're testing. So with our new ARPA, and we have that Tiger grant. I mean, we've gotten quite a lot of federal funds lately, so it's not a bad idea.
okay. Okay, other questions on the grant?
Well, there was another possible.
Yeah, let's hear the other one, Audrey.
So the other one is an internal audit of contracts within the purchasing and contracts department. There is a decent amount of contracts that are new or ongoing related to services and construction. There is a potential risk for poor performance on the side of the vendor that may not be addressed timely by the city's purchasing contracts department. Additionally, there's a strategic plan initiative that the city will create a central contracts repository by fiscal year 24, which, absent of a centralized repository, tends to increase the risk of contracts that are not tracked or not tracked properly. So we would look at breaking out the contracts into two types, those that are less than 50,000, those that are greater than 50,000, as the procedures appear to be different depending on the type and the amount of contract. And we would assess those contract monitoring procedures, review for certain required provisions that should be in the contract, proper contract payments, and following of the policies and procedures. This one would be about the same amount, 25,000.
Okay,
I honestly thought this was another great suggestion simply because so many of our federal grants have contracts. And without the right language in those contracts, the feds will ding us. And and we have gotten findings before on single audit related to contracts and missing language and that kind of stuff. So again, I thought this was a great suggestion. I don't think we've ever had a audit on contracts alone. We've done public works projects, but I don't think we've ever had somebody look into our contracts.
yeah, I feel like we had a discussion on this, maybe it was a couple years ago, when maybe it was related to AP audit or something.
We have had
Remember,
our AP audit, but that's not like
Yeah.
the actual contract.
Right. How much, so we're backing off on the body worn cameras review. We spent how much on that? Like 10?
I think it was 10,000.
10K, so we got 35 there, right?
Right.
The utility billing, is that ongoing right now? Have we started that yet?
Yep, I think they've
Yes,
started.
Audit Committee Chair. Sorry. We are 30% complete on the utility billing. So we have gone through our planning phase and several weeks into the fieldwork testing phase. And we anticipate wrapping up testing the end of September, first week of October, and completely ready with report and everything by the end of November. At which point we have expended roughly 17,500, leaving about 32,500, which we anticipate utilizing that amount.
Okay.
And
So to date, we've expended about 28,000 of the full budget, 110,000, leaving 12,000 for the risk assessment for FY 23-24, 2,400 for follow-up, and 500 for fraud, waste, and abuse, leaving the remaining 35,000 for an open audit that we're discussing.
And if we did select one of these audits, she said about 25, 30,000. So we can hold 30,000 just to be on the high end. And then I can put the remaining 5,000 into special projects and validation, just in case we want to validate some of the utility billing findings once they've been corrected or
Mhm.
that kind of thing. Because right now there's only $100 in it, and I don't think that's going to go very far in that little budget.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know, maybe this is one where we, if we're talking 50 or 55K for the grant and contracts together, maybe this is one where we start one in FY, in the current fiscal year and finish it up in the next fiscal year.
Well, I'd prefer we pick one for this year and then we'll do the other one next year. So we can do grants this year. Because there's 35,000 we have to play with, so we can do one
Okay.
of the two.
Oh, so you're saying it would be about 30 grand for, like, let's say we pick the grant and then that would put 5,000 into the fund
Right.
for
For the special projects, yes.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that seems reasonable. And then the question is, which one do we think has the most urgency as far as, grant reviews or contract reviews? And part of the,
From staff, I can tell you, we have never done a contracts project, so that might be a good thing to look
Audrey, how
at.
much overlap would there be? I mean, obviously with grants, there's going to be review of contracts. How much overlap would you see between, if they were doing a grant audit, how much overlap into the contracts area would there be?
There might be some overlap, but I don't anticipate a lot of overlap as the contracts procedures start and stop and the points within that process are different. The grants, some of them might be in play there. So that would probably be a better one to start with because that could give us a good foundation and understanding of the entire contracts process, but also looking at it from a grants perspective. If we just looked at it from contracts, I don't think we'd get that same knowledge transfer back to grants where we'd be able to have that knowledge transfer.
Seems reasonable.
So the idea is that you would start with the grants, some of the grants which have contracts in them, and then you'd move forward to the contracts and do that second. Is that what I heard you say?
No, it'd be a reverse. You would-
Yes, that's correct.
No, that's what I
Oh.
thought I heard.
We
you
would
say.
start
okay.
with
the
grants.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
With the thought being that some of these grants have contracts underneath them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
But they wouldn't be looking at the contract process. They'd probably just be looking to see if the correct language was in the contract.
When was the last time we did any grant reviews? Do you remember? Oh, I think this has happened before, but it's been
I
a
think
few
it
years.
was. Here it is.
Was it 2018?
2018. Yeah, 2018.
And that was with your former internal auditors.
Yeah.
June
And did-
30th,
I believe there was
2018.
one recommendation, one finding.
Okay.
Yeah. But we do have, every year externally, we have a grants audit. So,
No. Part of the annual external audit, right?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
putting together a schedule of expenditures of federal awards. They have to audit a certain percentage. So, which is fine. I'm ambivalent as to what you guys want to do, truly. Grants is fine.
I don't know. Any comments? Does anybody have any preference?
I think my preference would be the grants first, and then do the contracts later.
That works. Initially I was actually leaning contracts first, since that hasn't been audited. But with what has been discussed, how the information coming from auditing grants could then apply, or that information could apply to a better review of contracts that might make more sense. So yeah, I'm kind of torn on this one, but I would support grants first.
Okay. Well, do we need a motion on this, or is it just, we just give Audrey the go on?
I would like a motion that the remaining, I wrote it down here, that the remaining 35,000 funding go to,
Okay. So, somebody want to tee that up?
Yeah, for me, one of the critical things for me is going to be the scope of this audit, because I don't want to overlap the single audit requirements. So I kind of want to have that discussion when we're doing the scope of this audit, because I don't think that we need to duplicate things. I would rather save that money and use it for the contracts portion of it. So for me, the scope is going to be important on this one.
well, and I can tell you, we'll bring back agreed upon procedures for this at the next meeting, so
Yeah.
we can really dig into what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, that was my thought.
Yeah,
Um,
after we've had our single audit, because I can't do both at the same time.
Okay, so with that kind of caveat about looking at the scope and the agreed upon procedures and having them not duplicate the single audit work, I would move to approve allocating $30,000 for a grants project and the remaining $5,000 to the special projects category, and recommend the entire audit program to the board.
I can second that.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
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 Perfect, thank you. I'll have a long discussion with the board this time.
Okay, so that settles 6E. And 6F is the discussion on the 2023 audit program work update and hotline activity.
Yep, this one's all Audrey.
Audrey,
Oh,
Just
thank you.
update on the work and just any, if we have any hotline issues the last couple months.
Excellent. Yeah, so I'll recap what I'd mentioned earlier is we've expended about 28,000 of the $110,000 budget, and we have completed the preliminary risk assessment of the body worn camera program. We are 30% complete of the utility billing and anticipate wrapping that up by the end of November. We have left in the budget then to complete the FY 23-24 risk assessment, the follow-up activities, and about 500 for the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. There has been no activity on the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. I do test that every year and sent over a test and confirm that it is working as intended, so that is successful. That wraps up where we're at with that. We just talked about grants, moving that forward, so that will be the audit program will be in place next time that we meet together as audit committee. And that is where we're at with the budget.
Okay, thank you. Six G is discussion of the timing for the next audit committee meeting.
So I'm pretty open for this. We can do December 6th or the 13th if Audrey believes we can have the information ready by then, or we can do any Tuesday in January.
So I'm gonna throw a little bit of a wrench. I am
okay.
gone from the 3rd to the 19th of December and the 11th through the 22nd or 23rd of January.
Okay.
I'm taking
I'm
my
gone the
winter-
end of December, so I think December's out.
Okay.
What is, I don't have a calendar in front of me. What's December 3rd? Did you say December 3rd, James?
Yeah.
Yeah, I leave. It's just 3rd is a Saturday.
Okay.
And I think she said that they weren't going to finish with the audit stuff work until like the end of November. So that's a tight turnaround to
Yeah.
get that last week after Thanksgiving between.
Yeah, so that's why I kind of said January, probably a Tuesday in January. So which Tuesdays would work for you, Jim?
I can probably do the 3rd is the first one, the 10th, which is right after, I'm pretty sure right now we're leaving on the 11th.
Okay.
So I could do that Tuesday, the 10th.
Works for me. Tuesday, the 10th of January.
January 10th.
Works for me.
Same time, 1:30.
Yep, same
Okay.
time,
All right, Tuesday,
same place.
Tuesday, January 10th, 2023, believe it or not.
Yep,
Um,
2023, that's gonna mess me up a little
Yeah.
bit. Always does.
And with that, did we have any public join during the meeting?
No public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. And with that, today's meeting is adjourned in 55 minutes.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, guys. Good job. We got a lot to talk about today.
Yeah.